Hi, Jill.
Hi, Martijn.
Yeah, are you on the ISQOLS account logged in?
I am. Are you too?
Yeah, me too. So I will go out. I couldn't start the webinar again from my own account.
I'll leave because I think you're the chair for this one. I just wanted to get it started.
Okay, great.
Okay, thank you.
Nancy?
Hello, Carol.
It's weird. I don't see you. I see.
No, I couldn't turn my video on.
Yeah, that happened last time. I think Jill has to make us hosts or something like that.
Yeah, I'm Jill today, Carol.
Oh, hey, Martijn, Jill.
So I couldn't access from my own.
Oh, so you don't have access either?
No, I had problems. So I will also make you co-host, Carol. Then you also have all the functionalities.
Perfect. Thank you. And you're gonna you're doing the questions, right, Martijn?
Yeah, we can do both. You can do the questions. I can do the technicality. So, allow the participants to speak if you give them a turn.
What would you prefer? I did the questions yesterday, so I mean, whatever you want.
Yeah, if you can do the questions would be great.
Okay, no problem.
And then I'll just I do the behind the screen technicality. So
that's good because I have no comparative advantage in the latter, and I would really royally mess it up. So I think
so I will
Nancy.
keep a look on the chat. So if there are questions there, and I will allow the participants to ask their questions. Yeah.
Perfect.
Perfect.
Well, thanks for being here, Nancy. I'm sorry, I'm in my Friday casuals. I've been on every day with the virtual dress up clothes and then just decided the hell with it today.
No, I'm smart, but only because it's easy.
Yeah, but it's great to have you. We were talking about you yesterday with Julie during Julie's talk.
Oh, I missed it because I had the kids, but I mean, I love hearing Julie speak.
Yeah, there's a recording of it, and then also it was all singing your praises, so don't worry.
That's always good, so I can have to check.
Can
I check if I can share my screen?
You should be able to. Do you have a share screen thing?
Yeah. Okay, can you see that all right?
Yeah, that's perfect.
Brilliant. I'll stop sharing now.
So we'll give it a couple more minutes, and then I'm going to introduce you, and then you'll have sort of the full screen and everything, and Martijn /Jill or Jill /Martijn, and I will be back for the questions. So
Fantastic.
you have, you know, roughly an hour, a little less to speak, and then we have a just sort of free for all.
That's fantastic. And I've got quite a lot of content. So what I might do, depending on how long I'm doing, is miss some bits. I wanted to make it, I always get asked whether we're sharing the slides. Is it okay to share the slides afterwards?
Yeah,
Fab.
yeah, absolutely. So if you want to go back to slides, you can. Hi, Kelly. That's Kelly Hampshire.
Hi, Carol. How are
There you go.
you?
Good. I wish we were in Vermont in person this year, but we will be next
I
year.
know.
They're hosting it in Vermont next year, Nancy. So we have to find you a role. It's beautiful up there.
I
In fact,
love
I'm
them.
going to Stowe on Monday. for
Oh,
just-
wonderful. It should be,
Yeah.
it's been oppressively hot the last week or so. So I think next week it looks like in the 70s and a lot of sunshine and dry. So
Perfect. But I don't think you have an idea what oppressively hot is unless you're in DC right now.
oh gosh.
I
Well, we're just
just
not
had
set
to
up for it here though.
I had to float in cold water after running a few minutes
Ah.
from now. It was so hot. I mean, literally, after you run, you feel like you're just exhausted for the rest of the day. It's
We're
terrible.
returning with students to campus on Monday, and my office doesn't have air conditioning. And if I want to
Oh.
have my window open, I can't hear anything on the computer because of the traffic along Main Street. So I was just like having to sit in my office with no air, just a fan going. It was
Uh-oh.
just awful. We're just not set up.
No,
for it.
I have been up in Vermont when it's very hot, and since nobody has air conditioning, you can't get away from it. It's pretty awful.
Yeah, but
But anyway, well, I'm excited for us to be there next year.
Jane and I as well, for sure.
That's great.
Nancy, where are you calling in from?
I'm in South London, actually. My experience of Vermont, though, is learning to ski. So the idea that it's hot is just kind of blowing my mind slightly.
Yeah, Vermont skiing is very steep and very cold. It's probably how you
Sometimes
remember it.
icy.
It's not the most friendly place to learn to ski, but once you can ski well, it's a wonderful place to ski. Actually, it's better in March too than earlier in the winter. It tends to be kind of gray and fairly horrible. And then March it's sunny and a lot warmer.
Absolutely. I
Well,
did
my
think about
experience-
putting
my-
in a winter picture into the slide deck, but I didn't want to freak people out. So
That's funny. Well, my experience in London in the summer is that it can be incredibly cold. Is it cold now?
It needed a jumper, but no, it's fine. It's lovely. Just right.
That's good. All right. Well, I think we've got quite a few people on, and I think we should get started if you're ready, Nancy.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll just introduce you. I don't think I'll get through your whole bio, but I'll try and hit the main points. So welcome everyone to the last day of our annual 2021 conference for ISQOLS. It's been a packed few days. And we've had, if you look at the schedule and do the time zone calculations, we've probably had 24-hour sessions. So for some of you, it's morning, good morning. For some of you, it's evening or afternoon. And for some of you, it's night. But anyway, welcome to all of you, and hope you're either just waking up or trying to stay awake. But I'm sure Nancy will make it so interesting you will have forgotten what the time is by the time it's done. We're really pleased to have my dear friend and colleague, Nancy Hay. She's the founding director of the What Works Center for Wellbeing, which is the UK Center for Wellbeing Evidence, Policy and Practice. I'm very lucky to have been on the advisory board there for a long time and watch the wide range of wonderful work that they do. And they really go everywhere from the very beginnings of setting up robust academic and scientific studies of interventions to improve well-being, enhance well-being, to robust evaluations for generalization and cost benefit calculations, to really putting things in policy. And I think they're not just a national gem, but actually a gem for the world of well-being. And I tell people about you all the time, Nancy, and how you could be a model for many countries like the US to have similar institutions. So Nancy's also a leader in the field of well-being. She's worked with the UK Parliament as special advisor to the House of Lords Life After COVID Committee. She's worked with governments, researchers, businesses, and philanthropists around the world. She established the civil service policy profession in the UK and worked with the country's top civil servants to bring well-being into policy since 2010. And I was on the margins of some of those efforts, and they really are impressive. And again, I think a model for countries interested in getting well-being into policy. Nancy's a fellow of the Royal Society of Art and a fellow of the Institute for Coaching. And we're hoping she can coach us today in some of the best lessons from and best practices in well-being evaluations and in policy. So with that, Nancy, over to you.
Thanks, Carol. It's a fantastic introduction. It's been brilliant to be with you this week and actually today as well. And I must say that I am standing very much on the shoulders of the giants with the work we do here. We're a collaborating centre. We're doing evidence synthesis. So hopefully I'm sharing some things that you'll already know, but obviously some new ones as well. Now, I'm also a policy official, so I will always speak at the pace of policy, which is usually at 100 miles an hour. So I've prepared this as a pack, and you can, I'm happy to share it afterwards as well. So I won't go into detail on each of the sections, but so I'm Nancy Hay. I am the Executive Director of the What Works Centre for Wellbeing, and we're based in the UK, and we work across the UK. I'm going to talk about this average of 17 years that it takes to get wellbeing, get science and evidence into policy and practice, and what we do to try and shorten that gap. So a little bit about us. We're, as Carol said, we're the UK's national body for wellbeing evidence, policy and practice. We are a cross-sector partnership of public sector and government, civil society sector, academia and business. We work with these universities, but actually they just represent consortiums within themselves. We work with over 30 different universities across the UK and beyond to bring together and share robust, accessible, and I hope useful information about wellbeing. And it was the usefulness that got me into this subject in the first place. So our focus is on these 4 areas. It's not the only ones that matter, but the ones that we think we can contribute most to the wellbeing of the UK. And one is around methods, measures, and wellbeing economics, and sort of how we use this stuff, sort of the infrastructure to make the difference. One is around places that we live in. So there's quite variation of wellbeing across the UK, and I'll talk about that later, but also the sense of community we get in a range of different settings, including work, but also places themselves. Because connection and loneliness is a big part of our wellbeing, we work with them and recently merged with the Campaign to End Loneliness. And because we're miserable between 23 and 68, and that's our working age, we've working very hard on wellbeing at work and life during working age. We do have partnerships across the life course, though, working with the Children's Society of their Good Childhood Report with the UK data for under 18s. We work with early intervention and aging better, so spanning the whole of the life course. And what we do and why we do it is partly because we have a tendency to look at studies that confirm what we already feel is true. We're really busy, each of us, at our own thing. So we're busy being expert in our own area. We take shortcuts all the time. We'll often look at the studies that the evidence literacy is always slightly there. We'll pick the studies that ones that suit us. So we look across that evidence base to help make sense of it really quickly for busy people, and also make sense of how much they can rely on the different findings. And so that's an example of what we bring together and try and make it accessible and visible. So this is like the idea that if you just tweet about your research on Twitter, explaining it in a short thread, it will just get seen more by more people. And this is not about dumbing down. This is about explaining confidently about the research, but we're trying to make it accessible as quickly as we can. So all of those studies in a summary that is accessible to someone who is non-expert but interested. We also do look at the robustness of those studies, so and how confidently we can rely on those, and that's really important. So instead of saying, oh, there's no evidence for this, or that we know this very strongly, or this looks innovative, we can say how confidently something is known, and therefore how big a response an organization can make. Can they legislate because we know it confidently, or is it innovative? And actually, next step should be a slightly smaller pilot, bigger pilot, and learning as we go. So we're able to give that level of confidence, and actually giving people confidence to use wellbeing evidence consistently because people tend to think it's fluffy, and it just really is not. And that's part of what we have been doing, making sense of it for people as well. So that's what we do. I thought you would be interested in the experience we've had using that wellbeing evidence during the pandemic, and just a little bit stepping back about why we've been using it. So I came to wellbeing as a policy official, and I came at it thinking about what makes a good law. As I'm a lawyer by background, and good law makes good policy. And I was thinking, well, what is a success? And I also do career coaching and life coaching, and we were talking about that. What is success? And that's kind of what we're talking about. What are we aiming towards? And people will move across the world in search of this better life, they'll move across town, they'll move jobs. And that's where we've been working with the OECD, among others, around this better life, the index, getting better understanding of what it means to live.
Nancy, I'm sorry, is there any way you could speak a teeny bit louder? I think it's a little bit hard to hear you.
Yeah.
That's great, thank you.
Thank you. No, thanks. I don't know that. So it's great to know. Okay. So we're talking about what is a better life, and how we know. And we think that the purpose of all of the things you're trying to do in public policy and in civil society is to improve lives. And the question is, does it improve lives? And how do we know? And my answer is you ask. We ask how you're doing. And because we're British, we say we're fine. So you have to ask twice. So how are you doing? And we have these massive data sets now. And we can see that pre-pandemic, since 2011-12, things were getting gently better. You can see the general indicators of well-being going up in the right direction. You can see variation across the country, but we know what it's doing, and it's going generally in the right direction. Then the pandemic hit. We can see that dotted line. All of the measures of well-being suddenly moved really quite quickly. And this is the more robust measures that are every 3 months. And so there was something happening with these data. And then you look at how it's going since then, and you can see that the biggest hit was on anxiety, which is this bottom right one in March 2020. But actually that recovered relatively quickly. We're still not at pre-pandemic levels with anxiety. It's still high. The other one that did the biggest drop I've ever seen is the happiness one. And actually that is the one that is back above pre-pandemic levels. Purpose moved less, the eudaimonic measure, which is the top right one, but it's still slightly lower than we would like. And then the life satisfaction one, which I thought would move much more slowly, has moved quite a lot. And it's not at pre-pandemic levels, but it is getting back up that way. And that's the one I'm watching quite closely, because as many of you'll know, it has long-term lag effects of it. So we were able to see that impact of the pandemic. Those measures don't tell you the full story, though. These are more detailed ones. This is polling data, so it's not as robust, but it's got a broader range of moods and feelings. And actually the predominant mood after feeling very scared and less happy was feeling bored. So there's clearly scope for a range of different measures in that. What we were able to do, because we have this data from 2011-12 onwards, was compare the impact of the pandemic to other national events. So we can see the impact of a royal wedding and Easter. We can see the impact of a hot summer and those spilling over into riots. We can see the impact of a very wet winter and flooding. We can see the impact of the Olympics. And this was a home Olympics. You get a little bit of a bump from an away Olympics. And you can see that massive peak from Christmas as well. And that caused so much policy-making angst here in the UK around the pandemic. Why did this happen? Well, we know that the pandemic hit multiple determinants of well-being in one go. It hit our social connections, it hit our fear of basic needs, our worry about whether we can get food, are we going to make ends meet? It hit jobs, actually, in many sectors. And it actually, what it did do is meant we had to rely very heavily on those sense of trust, the green space around us. And you can see that activity levels dropped quite dramatically. And so having somebody to rely on became really very important. So we were able to see this in practice playing out, and we analysed it as well. We looked at the impact across different groups on loneliness and mental health, and you'll see why shortly. So these are accessible, and we're able to produce them quickly to inform the response. One, actually, the story is, I think, is one of incredible community and civic resilience, actually, and a huge collective act of coping, as well as civic action in terms of what we did to support each other. What we're able to see with this data is both the immediate effects on depression, anxiety, and life satisfaction of different things that we did in response, whether we're communicating with family and friends, listening to radio, using the internet, and whether they impacted later as well, and those different coping strategies that people took depending on different stages of life or different circumstances that they were in. And this is something that I don't think we would have been able to do without that level of data. So if you're interested in the coping strategies and mechanisms, that's a really cool piece of work we did with UCL. So we've got 10 years of this well-being data. What does it tell us? And some of this you will know, but I think hopefully there'll be something new for some of you, at least in what I've got to say. The first bit is that there is a lot of data. These 4 ONS for subjective wellbeing questions are in over 30 different surveys. And I'd really encourage you to have a look at them, see what you can find in them. If you're researching, have a look. And you can add the questions to your own surveys. We know really confidently the mode effects. We know a whole range of different things. What we also have is loneliness measures and social capital measures that are being harmonized. But those subjective wellbeing measures are being reported alongside economic wellbeing and COVID data on the front page of our Office for National Statistics website at the moment. So this is really exciting stuff. The things it allows you to do is look at subjective wellbeing and things like food safety behaviors, which is a really unlikely thing to be looking at. And what it shows is that those people who are more anxious doesn't seem to make any difference to their food safety behaviors, but the sense of people with low sense of purpose, they're more likely to take less care about their food preparation. And that has some implications for people who work in the industry, for example, and illness rates and things like that. You will know that we do find what is found in other research. So we find it's not so great at 48 in the UK. We see the peaks at 23 and 68, and that bottoming out. And we can also see from antidepressant rates, which is this top right one, which is peaking at sort of 45 to 55, that antidepressant rates. And then the suicide rates. This is data from 2014 from the Samaritans, but it's still the same pattern, where the peak for men is 45 to 49, and for women is 50 to 54. So there is something going on here that is useful to have a look at. And we know recently, actually, we know that your life satisfaction at age 14, 15 is predictive of later mental ill health in that really high risk window for teens for mental health conditions. So several years earlier. We had a little look at what each of those 4 measures told us about that age dip. So we have a number of things that we find, which is quite exciting. We see that there is a high anxiety peak at 20 to 24 and a big happiness drop, where we suddenly notice what we get after Christmas, that big happiness drop. 20 to 24-year-olds also receive it. I think that fits with some advice I was given, that life begins at 22. Well, people really start to feel that impacts them. We find that the 45 to 55 low life satisfaction, actually lower happiness as well. So that midlife crisis is pretty real. No wonder we're looking for some fun. And that 85 plus, that sense of things that you do in life are worthwhile, massively drops off. It is a much smaller sample, but that's pretty consistent finding. The flip of that, of course, is that we get these teenage kicks. We get the thriving 30s and the retirement freedoms, where everything peaks sort of that later life. What are we doing that's different? So this is European Social Survey data, looking at the 5 ways to wellbeing. So these are 5 ways, daily actions that you can do that we know contribute to people's wellbeing. It's a big public health campaign that I'll talk about later in the session today. But those 5 ways to wellbeing show that what we're doing at those different ages really varies. And that, whilst the colours don't come across, that blue on the right-hand side of the chart, on the chart on the right-hand side, is that really top one is connect, which is what we're doing at 20 to 24. We're doing far less of taking notice, particularly young women. And we're not doing as much giving. If you look towards the middle of that, so that connection is not happening in midlife, and the learning tails off quite dramatically towards later life. But giving and taking notice massively starts to pick up in later life. So there's something about what we're doing that seems to be happening too. So what are we doing? Well, we're working. This shows us actually that those of us who are looking after the home have a very high sense of feeling what you do is worthwhile, lower, and it didn't change hugely during the pandemic. What we did see is that self-employed and unemployed had an increase in anxiety during the pandemic, and we can probably guess that why that is, partly because if you were worried about financial concerns, anxiety was much higher than if you were feeling more secure. So this distribution of the feelings of subjective well-being really varied across different populations. Looking at different populations, we can see a male, female gaps and differences. So overall, we see there's no difference in the UK over the last 10 years, that there's no real difference between the level of life satisfaction reported for men and women. And when you control for health and employment, women tend to do purpose. Women also consistently report high anxiety. And actually that anxiety gap has been getting bigger because men have becoming less anxious, women becoming more anxious. Men's life satisfaction was lower than women's, and that gap has been closing over the last 10 years, probably due to employment, but it's not clear. We had a look, because we could, at the drivers of, or what was going on with this sense of purpose, the sense of what we do in life is worthwhile. And I think this is the first time this has ever been done, and my colleagues, Magdalena, will be speaking about this later today. So we had a look at this data over the last 10 years, and we can find that there are around 2 million people in the UK that have a low sense of purpose. That's scoring 0 to 4 on whether the extent to what you feel the things you do in your life are worthwhile. That's quite high, but it varies by age. So, and a lot of the things that are fairly consistent with life satisfaction. So if you're married or cohabiting, your sense of purpose is higher than if you're single. Late 60s and early 70s is the highest feeling things you do in worthwhile, and the smallest percentage of people who feel have a low sense of purpose. And over 85 is the lowest sense of worthwhile, and 7% of people in that age group have a feeling that it's the biggest percentage of people with low sense of worthwhile. 18 to 24-year-olds is that other group. So I think up to age 25, you're really searching for this purpose bit. What matters for that sense of purpose? And we did some analysis looking at work, and we had some looking at other things. And actually a lot of it is consistent with life satisfaction, which was what we expected. But you can see some other things that make more of a difference. So we can find that job satisfaction starts to matter more, volunteering, working from home, particularly for women, being a student, although you tend to have higher anxiety, all more important for a sense of purpose. But that life satisfaction, less so for sense of purpose, is job security starts to matter, and working longer time with a current employer. And I wonder if you start to look at the different sectors in which you see that, and we can see that within the different departments in the government, actually in the UK, where there's different drivers are higher. So in the public or third sector, rather than the private sector, work purpose tends to be higher. And for those of us working in the charity sector, it tends to be negatively associated with life satisfaction. And you can see self-employment being better for sense of purpose, smaller organisation, working part-time, and looking after the home, as well as religion coming through as sense of purpose. So it starts to find these other elements of life that we know matter, but don't come through from the different measures. What we do matters, and our health matters. And this also comes through that job and leisure time matters. So, and also we found this really strange finding where using your garden or your green space made the difference to sense of purpose, and whereas just having it made a difference to life satisfaction. And the sorts of things that we can do, what does this mean in practice, which is the thing I end up having to try and work out, okay, what does all this mean for what we do? Spending your leisure time outdoors, being physically active, and engaging in cultural activities or membership, or having an interest basically becomes really important. And these are consistent themes throughout the research that I'll talk about today. So who is at risk of lowest well-being? So we think there's around 1% of the UK population. So a lot of people are low on, have the lowest well-being. And these are findings that many of you will be really familiar with. They have bad or very bad perceived health, a long-term illness or disability, are often renters, although other sorts of housing tenure doesn't seem to matter so much, are single or widowed, divorced or separated, middle-aged, which we've talked about, have a basic or no education, and I'll come back to that one again later, and are men. And they're slightly different from loneliness, but it's interesting to see those variations. We can also see from longitudinal data sets what is going on and what predicts adult life satisfaction over time. And this is the origins of happiness research that many of you all know. But what we see from that is the importance of mental health and emotional health all the way through the life course, and mother's mental health, so perinatal mental health being important. And that you'll see again has come through to the prioritization within the UK context. And what we also find from that, which again is something I'll bring up in terms of employment, is that whether or not a mother works doesn't impact the child's later life satisfaction or mental health. So that's really, it does seem to affect behavior, interestingly. But that takes us to a conundrum we'll get to later on. So that's the origins of happiness and longitudinal research. There's loads of research that we've done on culture and sport, on work and learning, and this is just a real headline of it. And the links are here, and you're welcome to have a look at this pack later. But what we find from the culture and sport activities is the experiential measures really matter. The sort of the feeling of happiness is incredibly strong from lots of the music and singing activities, but it's negative for purpose. It doesn't seem to do as much for life satisfaction. The sport and dance, we find weekly exercise. For those young adults who do this, they have high life satisfaction, high purpose, and high happiness. And during sport or physical activity, we feel happier, we feel less stressed, and we feel more purposeful. That weekly sport thing comes through again and again. So long-term resilience, if you're looking at sort of resilience to adverse life events, that weekly sport is in there, along with having a trusted adult and supportive friends. So that social connection bit is a constant theme. And we can see that is often the biggest thing that's driving in evaluations. That social support and belonging is often what's driving the life satisfaction change in the intervention studies that we've seen. Visual arts, much more varied. I think there's a lot of diversity. So simply saying doing visual arts is good for mental health and well-being, I think is not directly true, quite complicated. But generally, engagement with visual art is positively associated with life satisfaction. Outdoor recreation and the family. We find that being outdoors with relatives is a good thing. The happiest thing you can do is be active outdoors with your partner. And I think that again is a consistent finding as well. What we do in terms of work and adult learning. So again, there's loads of research studies here. Just wanted to pick out a few findings that sort of start to tell us a story across all of this. So we find that in terms of educational outcomes and that transition from education to employment, that relationships and mental health matter. We know that mental health at 14 and 15 matter, and that of boys, and it affects educational attainment. We also find that those with higher life satisfaction are increasingly likely to find employment, and that's particularly important for introverts, those of us probably with slightly fewer social connections. Adult learning really surprised me. One, because those who were more miserable had a very big impact of life satisfaction on hobby and leisure learning. So where people were really quite miserable, that made a really big difference. And the intensity of the job-related training seemed to matter. And again, job-related learning does seem to have a big well-being impact, particularly for the young, for men, and those in deprived areas. So there's something going on here, certainly that employers can do, and the role of educational establishments more broadly. We find job changes can help, particularly if you change both job and employer. But actually, what's interesting is that we adapt and we go back to baseline after 2 years. Really quite complicated gender, ethnicity, and employment findings that really deserve slightly more focused follow-up. So actually, I won't go into that in more detail unless people are particularly interested. And we also find that different places do better in terms of job quality, and that there isn't always a low education well-being penalty. And that's intriguing. So is there something we can do around the working age and the jobs that we do that can help improve well-being in working life? So we've talked a lot about these other ones. We're going to talk a little bit more in detail about well-being in places, because I think this is one of the things that stands out from the well-being data we've collected across the UK, that there is a variation in well-being across different places. And we looked at this concept of well-being inequality, the difference in well-being in a place, and well-being inequality between groups, so how different groups are doing across well-being outcomes. And in particular, we can map that across the UK, where the darker areas, this is actually Great Britain, darker areas are those with higher inequality. And we can also see the trajectory of those places. So there are decreases in inequality, so we're leveling up in 78 of 143 places that we had the data for. So there's a good story to tell in those first 5 years. What we also see is quite a complicated picture. And this is a real challenge for policymaking because different places need different things. And there's no one, this is good for well-being. There's no one yet. It's always yes and. We can see that there are places that high average well-being and it's pretty equally happy. We can see there's places, including Lambeth, where I live, where everyone's sort of equally miserable. We can see there are places that look relatively happy, high average well-being, but there are big differences, hidden pockets of misery in places. And then you can find places that have low average well-being and big differences in well-being, where there's lots of misery. And interestingly, there are places that you probably expect that to be the case. So the question then is, what additional value does this add? And I think it does add a better understanding of what's going on to our traditional measures. What we can also see is that this low education penalty isn't inevitable, and some places do better at it. So usually lower education, we saw that in those at high risk of low well-being, have a bigger well-being penalty, but not everywhere. And there are some places where people with low educational attainment do better, and some places where there's no impact at all. And so there is something going on here about making a better life for everyone who is living in a place, not just a particular type of person or a particular route to living a good enough life. The measure that seems to have caught on most, actually, interestingly, is this concept of those who are struggling most. So a measure focused on the lowest well-being, this measure concept of inequality, about this deprivation, this bottom line. So this is an average well-being for the 40%, average well-being for the 40% of people with the lowest well-being in a local authority, and also looking at those who are rating 0 to 4, so really quite miserable on all 4 of those subjective wellbeing measures. It's worth noting, though, that this is household-based data, this is annual population survey data, so it's household-based survey. It won't include people who are homeless or in an institution of some kind. And so there are approaches going on to look at how you can understand the wellbeing of different population groups who may not be captured and potentially might have lower wellbeing. So what's associated with those inequalities in life satisfaction in local authorities in Britain? So some of it is fairly obvious. So you can get bigger wellbeing inequality where there's low median income and unemployment. So that's pretty standard, I think. What we also see is in rural areas where we often have high average wellbeing, but they can have higher wellbeing inequality. And we think that's partly because of the higher impacts of unemployment in those areas. And so the cost of transport, the cost of access to services if you don't have it as well. But we're not sure. We see decreases in wellbeing inequality where there are higher levels of engagement with heritage activities. It's partly because we've got the data on that, but also the use of green space, so engagement with green space. So having that space, there's some lovely bits of the country that are really miserable. So it's not just having that green space, but it's using it as well. And higher female but not male life expectancy. And that's important because we've seen a drop in female life expectancy in some parts of the UK. And we also see something quite intriguing around public trust, lower perceived quality of society. So this is satisfaction with government and trust in our institutions is lower in places where there is greater wellbeing inequality. Now, I don't know which is a cause or a consequence, but that is those particular groups where that's important are those who are 25 to 64, so that working age groups, women, people with low education, those who are discriminated against. And there are big regional differences. So London and the South East have better perceived quality of society. And that was important in terms of some of the political changes that are happening here in the UK. So that's my overview. And so I'm going to think now about what do we do with this? What can it mean? So I'm talking about policies. So I'm going to talk about implementation here. I've talked about the evidence. I'm now going to talk about implementation in 4 different contexts. I'm going to talk about implementation in policy, implementation in public mental health in particular, implementation in communities and places, and implementation in the workplace. And then pose you 3 questions that I see as a real challenge from policy making as a result of this information. So how is a good policy made? Can you think of a good policy? Why is it good? Can you think of a bad one? I can think of many. Have a little think about what you think is good policy, why you think it's good. So public policy is very much a team sport. Good policies bring together the politics, the evidence, and the delivery. So it's probably best to say avoid evidence-based policy making. We're not saying the evidence is what we all do. We'll use evidence to inform that. And decisions will be made regardless of the evidence. So the best thing you can do is get the best evidence to the right people at the right time. And that what works is often evidence around that delivery bit. So what actually makes the difference. And so what we're doing here is that green circle around evidence in different ways and bringing that into the policy making process, all of which are. But it's hard. So we're trying to make policy for the outcomes that really matter to people's lives. And you'll see that language in some of the conversations and dialogues we're having in the policymaking space. In the public world, we talk about feeling safe, feeling loved, and feeling fulfilled. And those sort of language that we use to talk about our well-being, trying to shove that into policy structures, into economic policies, education policies, health policies, and hope to get this understanding of life satisfaction out the other end is pretty hard. And that's why it's not straightforward. So I've come at it from being in that policy world, trying to make sense of it here. And there's often that big disconnect. And I think wellbeing evidence can really help bridge that gap. One of the tangles I really see, though, is that we have an understanding of wellbeing that is either a national, beyond GDP, wider framework, quality of life studies concept that maybe, I don't know, we look at the World Happiness Report or something and see the difference between nations, or we have a very personal concept of what it means to live well or wellness or what we're sold. And actually this community wellbeing can feel quite different. Understanding which bits of wellbeing we're talking about and how it fits together and who can act at the appropriate level is quite an important part of what we're doing. So trying to make sense of those different concepts and actions that you can take and who can take them. It's also about an approach shift. And I think we're thinking about, so asking this question about how would your policy change if we're shifting from deficits to assets? We're shifting from doing something for people or doing to people to helping people build the capacities and the capabilities of themselves and their communities, kind of the enabling state concept or enabling funder. We're thinking less about treatment and illness, more about early intervention and prevention. That's flipping hard for a government to do, and because often the benefits will accrue of an activity will go to a different department. Better health is actually probably done by 80% of departments outside health. So how do you make that work across? So there's different things that you're thinking of in terms of approach. But there's 7 practical things that you can do as well as these approach. We've talked about measure, setting goals and priorities as well as SDGs, but also you can see that in the legislation in the UK, and monitoring outcomes, so outcomes-based policy making. So those are the sorts of things that can be done that are all wellbeing approaches. We can also appraise and screen, we can research and we can evaluate, which I'll talk about in a second. We can do wellbeing specific policies and projects. And then we can design in things about wellbeing around the edges as well and use techniques to do designing for people. But the big thing is, what do your priorities change if wellbeing is the primary goal? And we know from the subjective wellbeing data, we should look where there are fewer comparison effects. We should look where there is little adaptation, which is why the importance of employment in particular is there. We know we don't get used to that. And we should also look at a safety net as well, which is something that's been really important during the last year and a half as well. And we've come up with what we've called the wiser policies of when wellbeing is the goal, around work, around income, around society and governance, around measurement of wellbeing as a goal. And I think we should measure wellbeing in schools down to age 8 on a termly basis. Treating mental ill health as professionally as we do as physical ill health. And I think that's the big step we'll see over the next 30 years. And I'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. Supporting parents, one of the best things we can do, and building social emotional skills across the whole of the life course. And then relationships and communities, volunteering and giving, a whole range of different things, and livability that many of you will work on. So what difference does it make? I think in the UK, it is meant focusing on employment and inclusive employment for as many people as possible, because we know it makes a difference for a whole range of different reasons on our well-being. Mental health is the other one, and loneliness and social connection is the other one. So I think those are the three big things that we've seen that are different. I think physical activity and outdoor recreation is another one, and looking after our environment as well as a result. What you're doing when you're designing policies is also thinking about looking at the different things that you're trying to do. And I think when in wellbeing policies, we often got very mixed up about why are we doing a promotion thing that is only useful if you're well to start with. So I've got that slightly confused. Let me try again. So this idea that we can fix a broken leg, an absence of having your illness treated and then you're better, doesn't necessarily mean you are well. And so this sort of public health approach to policy making is helpful to understand why you're doing different bits of policies. Are we repairing and dealing with misery? Are we preventing that harm increasing? Are we working with those who are at risk? Or are we actively promoting and building the things that help us thrive, our capitals? And knowing the difference and why we're doing different ones stops us comparing apples with pears. And one of the ways we can do that is looking at, departments tend to think about their own work, and we were able to think about the impact of COVID on different aspects of our lives, using well-being, subjective well-being in particular, as an organizing principle for that. So we're able to look at the impact of COVID on all the different aspects of things that affect well-being, and according to different aspects of ourselves, so our gender, race, ethnicity, sexuality, disability, ill health, etc., our age, and look at the research that's been provided and try and make some sense out of that. And that helps departments see where they can contribute to our overall well-being and see where they fit into. This framework approach in practice is very useful for organizations. The other bit is about different approaches to policy making that has come in. So I think what many of you all know, behavioural insights, and I think we've talked a lot about them this week, but also things like customer insight, user experience, design thinking, anthropological techniques and stuff like that. So all of these different approaches to actually dealing with the fact, recognizing that we're dealing with real people and real life and what they actually do rather than what we think they will do. Always important there to hold in mind though is, what are you nudging people towards? You're nudging them, I hope, towards better well-being. So in government, we're always making choices though. That is the point. To govern is to choose. And how do you make those choices? If you've got this brilliant overarching framework of all these different outcomes that you use to use well-being, subjective well-being is a way you can use to do that now. So we've been working with government analysts to develop guidance that supports economic appraisal and business case development in the Treasury. So the purpose of an economic appraisal has now got well-being as an explicit focus. So all significant costs and benefits that affect the welfare and well-being of the population, not just market effects, are included in that appraisal and business case development. And this applies to the entire population, not just those who pay tax. And that is really significant. When I started getting into these ideas a long time ago, 20 years ago, I was trying to do a cost-benefit analysis of changes to the electoral system and the value of democracy. And that was a real challenge to do. And this starts to allow us to do those. And we've now got valuation of wellbeing guidance and schools policy appraisal guidance, applying that in the schools context. And this allows officials to use wellbeing science robustly, consistently, and with confidence at all stages of the public policy process. So that is all thinking about what you might do or why you might act, if or not, thinking about the different options that you might have, how you choose between different options or appraisal, and then evaluating it as well. So it's the whole policy cycle, and there is now guidance on that. And that was this summer and a major achievement for all involved. It majors on evaluation. So once you're doing something, how do you know it works? What do you know? Or do you need to evaluate? And we've been supporting for a long time wellbeing evaluation using a range of different measures that we can understand the impact between. And so this is an online tool used by the civil society sector in particular, but actually more broadly than that as well. And helping people benchmark and know what to do with the information once they've got it. Common metrics like these allow comparison across sectors. So a big win was getting not only those subjective wellbeing metrics in different surveys, but getting them in different evaluation frameworks. So the people who are doing sport are most interested in, did you do more physical activity? But did that physical activity improve well-being as well? That's where the questions start to come in. And that allows you to compare a sport intervention with an economic one or a housing one or a health one, and helps us get a better understanding of what makes the biggest difference and for whom, when and for how much. We then collect up the evaluations that use them, and we've got a good state of the nation here. And one of the exciting things that this tells us is that there are a range of different things that can improve subjective well-being beyond some of the obvious ones. So a psychological intervention feels quite an obvious one, but actually housing, energy efficiency for low-income housing also seem to improve all 4 of the subjective well-being measures. And I wasn't expecting that, and we have high confidence in the evidence around that. So hopefully will give us an increased range of options for tackling some of the challenges we've got ahead of us as nations. So I've talked about policy making. I'm going to talk about 3 different contexts now in the last 15 minutes. I'm going to talk about public mental health, community, and workplace. So if you take a moment to think about when you felt your best, what was that like? What was going on for you? Public mental health is partly about helping people feel that way more of the time on a population level. And there's really strong public engagement with personal well-being. So this idea about, am I feeling good and functioning well? I think the feeling good bit has got lots of common national discussions around. You'll see articles in magazines about what does it mean to make you happy, all that sort of stuff. That functioning well bit is quite important as well. But I think there's quite a strong public engagement with this personal well-being, and loads of companies and organizations are doing this now at a range of different contexts. Really exciting to see. And science is coming into these science-backed actions that are everywhere. So the 5 ways for well-being were developed in 2008 as a result of a Government Office for Science report. And now just nobody owns them. They're kind of just there, and they're everywhere. So these 5 ways to well-being we talked about earlier are 5 practical actions you can do on a daily basis that improve mental well-being. And they're not necessarily the most important. Get a job, I'd probably put in there, be nice to your partner. But 5 ways to well-being. So connect, be active, take notice, keep learning, and give. And for young people, the give has been switched out for be creative and play. And there's no reason why as an adult you can't be creative and play. It's just that we needed 5 so that we could remember our 5 a day as a public health message as well. Great Dream is the Action for Happiness one, and we evaluated the Action for Happiness community course. Great if you like it, pick one, go with it. They do monthly calendars, which have a huge reach of people taking action. And then Perma Plus, which is the South Australian model, which I think is fantastic. Also does really well in terms of leadership training too, and I think is particularly useful for work because of the concepts of engagement and flow and accomplishment are in there. And I like the plus because we know that physical health matters, and adding that in is really important. So they're really popular. They're kind of out there everywhere. The other thing we're doing in the UK is scaling effective interventions at population level. So the 2 that I'm most familiar with that we've been feeding evidence into, one is Every Mind Matters, which millions of people in the UK have now used. I'm astounded by the level of take up of this online mental health resource. We know psychoeducation works. We know it prompts action. Over 1 million people have done a mind plan. And Student Space is a similar sort of resource for students who found it particularly difficult during the pandemic. So those who have been under 25, I think, have found sort of 16 to 25 found things really tough, and students in particular have had their world change dramatically. They should be out socializing, and they can't in the way that they would normally be expected to do. So Student Space is another one. There's loads of mental health awareness now, I think, and we've got to the stage where, yeah, people get that you should take action to support people's mental health, but I think we're running very quickly out of what the evidence supports you can do. And so the big thing I think will happen is this commitment to mental health research. And I think we're 30 years behind. So mental health research kind of stopped in the 70s and 80s. and it needs to catch up with illnesses like cancer, and it can with commitments like this. So joint mental health research goals across the medical science research funders, across the general mental health research funders, and this amazing commitment from the Wellcome Trust of 200 million investment in mental health as one of their 3 priorities. And then there's also this idea that mental health is larger than healthcare. And this is sort of principle 3 of this one with World Economic Forum, WHO, UNICEF and Wellcome Trust. And this is the idea that a lot of the things that we're talking about today and the interventions we look at support mental well-being. So that's mental health, something that I think is worth spending a little bit of time on. The other one is this local bit. We saw there was real variation. So have a think about it when you have enjoyed where you live the most. What was it like? Someone recently suggested to me that many of us think so highly about our college days because actually it was where everything was within a 15-minute walk and it was really social. Maybe there's something in that, I don't know. But there is something in community in place. So something about relationships, whether they're in a community of interest, whether around a work or geographical locations, but we know relationships are important, both for us as individuals and as communities. So you can see the impact of having no close friends. People who've got no close friends are more likely to be unsatisfied with their life. And we know that having a partner is as good for you as being unemployed is bad for you. We know at a national level, social support is a big factor at explaining the variation between countries, and it can provide resilience. And we've seen that in the response to the pandemic with big volunteering response and communities coming together. We've got social capital metrics across the UK around civil engagement, volunteering, helping people, friendships from different groups, can people be trusted, those types of things. We've also had a look at how local areas can make decisions around wellbeing in the same way as nations can. And we had a look at what data they need. So looked at what wellbeing data there was for every local authority in the UK and what data they had on the drivers of wellbeing and how they applied in that context. And now that is available for every local authority across the UK using existing data. So whilst those data may not be the most accurate reflection of those concepts, they're pretty good and you can get a good understanding for every local area. And actually that's used in legislation in Wales. So they have this idea in the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act where every local authority has to do a local wellbeing assessment just before the elections. That's published, and then after the election they do a plan based on that, using all of the public sector organisations in an area come together. It's quite an exciting, again, that's around measuring and monitoring progress and priorities in a place. You can do a similar thing with the civil society organisation. This is the Canal and Rivers Trust. They're a nationwide charity, one of the 3rd biggest in the UK, and they can look at, whilst they're an environmental charity, looking at the waterways, making sure they are safe in terms of the environment. They can also have a look at the impact that they have in terms of prosperity, in terms of the places that they're in and the people around them, and they can see that they're different across the country and take action accordingly, and their outcomes framework is pretty awesome in that respect. So that's people, places, and organisations in places. The last part of this is around work, and all of us, I've ended with this because all of us are involved in work. So if you ever think about when you were at your best at work, what was it like for you? What was going on? A time when you're really enjoying it. I would bet that some of this was going on. You had great relationships. You were really interested in the work. You had good health, physical and mental. You felt safe financially, physically, and sort of culturally. You were supported, and you had a sense of purpose, clear goal, a good team. All of those sort of things were going on for you. And actually this helps us make a bit more sense. So what we're seeing in the workplace is this thing that, yes, I want to do something to do with well-being, or I'm doing something on physical health or mental health or staff engagement or all these different things, or improving the IT systems. How can you look at that in the round and understand the difference that you're having? So what we did again was taking subjective well-being and looking at the drivers of that and weighting them in the workplace, and are helping people understand how they can choose what they need in their organization. So instead, what we were finding and what we still find is lots of organizations have either 2 things. One, they have somebody who's just doing the latest fad, they've read a book and they want to do it in their organization. You've got someone who's a bit more thoughtful, basically somebody who's keen, maybe in HR, maybe in occupational health, depending on the industry, taking a lead. But what we see makes the biggest difference is where an organization has a whole organization approach, and that improves both well-being and performance. And what we find again is that not all work is the same. So not all well-being interventions will be the same. If you're working on an oil tanker, it's going to be really different than if you're working as a social worker, or if you're a teacher, or if you're in an actuary's job or a lawyer. And there's different contexts. So not all work is the same is the first thing. And knowing what makes the biggest difference for the people and the job they're doing where you are is what makes a difference. So helping people navigate what they should choose to do, how people are doing, and how they should think about is one of the things that we've been doing. And that data has been really, the wellbeing data and the drivers of it have been really important for it. Those questions have been turned into voluntary reporting standards for wellbeing at work. And so this was organizations coming together, wanting to do something, wanting to tell the world how their people were doing, and show some accountability on it. And so that's what we've used. You can see again those subjective wellbeing questions and questions on the drivers of wellbeing there as well. We're also able to look at happy jobs. So how the people in your organization or sector are doing. This is occupation data. It'd be really interesting to update this actually now, looking at, again, this is a classic one where you can see the pay against the happiness, and some weird things pop out of that, but we can see telephone sales and call centers are pretty low on that list there. The other one, I think florists come quite high, and I once asked a florist what made them so happy, and actually what she said is, yes, I thought it's because you're doing something pretty every day and you're chatting to people about pretty flowers and stuff, but actually what they're also doing is helping people mark life events, both happy and sad. And I think that is an element of memento mori to it as well. So happy jobs, occupational data. We're also able to look at graduate outcomes. This is graduate outcomes and anxiety and salary by different subject areas. And often this will reflect the well-being of those in the industries that they go into, actually, in the states those industries are in. But there's some really weird anomalies. I'm still trying to work out why vets are so much more anxiety than others. But you can see there that medicine, health, education tend to do different levels of anxiety as well. So what we can also do is do these what works interventions in the workplace. And what we're able to see here is that there's advice and support around finances for civil servants tend to improve. What I thought it would improve was anxiety. What it actually improved was life satisfaction, purpose, and happiness. This skills training support for military families around parenting and social connections, it reduced anxiety. So there's something interesting going on. It's not a strong study, but they're starting to find those. We've done goal setting trials. We've done mindfulness trials with the police and MOD. We've done workplace trials with children's social care. But you're starting to see evaluations take place. This one is really cool. I told you earlier that call centers were pretty miserable places to work. This is Jan de Neve's team at the Wellbeing Research Centre in Oxford, and they found that this increases in happiness also showed increases in productivity. So there is something useful going on here that employers can start to engage with, and we're starting to see that they're able to do it, and we need to move the evidence base on from case studies to slightly more robust evidence in the workplace. But we know that workplace is just a setting, it's just a community of people. And one of the things that the best thing employers can do is provide a job and a good quality job at that. And that good corporate citizenship has a big ripple out. So we know that you and I are all parts of families, we're parts of communities, we're part of a wider context. We coach the sports team, we run the local scout group, we attend our church or our mosque, we do all these other things. We're part of the community that we're in. And so that good corporate citizenship of employers and wellbeing at work is starting to make that difference, and I think can also help us build up the national wellbeing picture. So lastly, I'm going to end on 3 challenges which I think come from these. One, that just because of wellbeing, the data shows that people with men are more affected than women by unemployment, for example. or that the job is more, people value the job over air quality, doesn't necessarily mean we should stick with that status quo. The challenge is to try and, we know that women working, and that for some women losing their job is as damaging as it is for men. We know that we want to change that. So how do we keep high well-being whilst we're having these societal changes, whether around changes to how employment works, or changes that we're going to need to make around the environment? So how do we sustain high well-being for everybody concerned? So that just transition is really important and a really difficult challenge. Coupled with that is different places need different policies, and you could see that across the UK. There were some places that were thriving, some places that were struggling. There'll be some places, some people within those places that have different things, and that complicated picture of some people needing money and growth and some people needing a voice at different times, or will be really quite a complicated picture to get right and sustain your ability to be in government and be trusted in government. And that's a real challenge, I think, for policymakers as well. And also this conundrum about social capital and how it relates to economic metrics like productivity and employment, and well-being as well. So starting to unpick and understand that, and particularly about what you can do to improve social capital, and when, and what makes the difference. Does it come before the economic revival or be after, and how do you do it? So those are the three areas where I see change coming up. And I think I will leave it there, and we'll go to some questions. I can already see some questions in the Q&A, and I look forward to talking with you now. So thank you very much. I'll stop sharing my slides.
Thank you, Nancy. That was wonderful. Absolutely wonderful, as expected. And there are a couple questions in the chat. I have one. I don't know if it's possible. I had trouble reading. If I read this slide on the low anxiety, the vertical axis was percent of people with low anxiety, and then and I guess it was the kind of, was it the kind of job, and then the salary. I was surprised.
One.
Yeah, I was surprised to see the medical sciences as low anxiety. Am I reading it wrong? My daughter's pre-med and it's not low anxiety. My dad was a doctor. I was just surprised by it, but it could be the stage in the career.
This is the graduate outcome, so afterwards, compared to others, and it's percentage with low anxiety within that. It was surprising to me. I think the medical and education professions seem to have better job security.
That could be it. Yeah, that could be it.
And quite high pay compared to some of the other areas.
And that's based on the UK?
It's UK data, yeah. And
yeah, that could be quite different in the US, where the medical profession is, it's just that there's a difference in terms of job security and the way the insurance system works and everything else. So it might be a whole different experience, and not necessarily a better one here for sure.
They also may also be older, actually, because of the length of time that they're in the course, compared to other graduates, and they may also have a lot bigger career, see more of a career structure. So there's a whole range.
Yeah, they've sort of gone through a lot of hands-on training before they're graduates. Yeah, that makes sense too. Anyway, the thing I'm really interested in, that I think you all are making pathways in, is this well-being and equality. And there was a gender component of it that I found interesting as well. Was it that if you had more women, there was a lot of data, but it was sort of, there was a gender difference in places with well-being and equality, and that I was wondering if you might explain.
Yeah. So it was that actually I had to go back and check it when I was doing this presentation. So what I'm presenting here is sort of 6 years worth of findings. So it's quite a lot in a quick time. So I wasn't quite sure who would be most interested in which bits, but the gender bit is really interesting. So it's about the healthy life expectancy of females in a place. was linked to places where if you had low life expectancy of females, it was bigger well-being inequality. And actually that's interesting because health inequalities around the women, in particular low-income women, has gone the wrong way over the last 10 years in the UK. So I'm just trying to start pick that apart because yes, I don't quite know what's going on there. It could just be that men are equally unhealthy everywhere.
Yeah, that could. And sort of
there.
older women tend to kind of keep the thing going, keep the train going for extended families or whatever. I don't know, but I was puzzled by it.
I think it's what's happened is the life expectancy of women in poor places has got worse, and it hasn't. Yeah, I think that's what that's telling us, that we're not getting health right for some of the poorest people in the country.
That makes sense. That's intuitive. Okay, there are a couple of questions in the chat. Let me start with these. So one is from Fuad, and it says, how can we manage happiness sciences in a well-coordinated and avoiding contradicting conceptions about subjective and objective well-being and the role of economic growth in well-being achievements? That's interesting. I guess I don't see subjective and objective well-being as contradicting as much as complementary. The same with growth, but I'm going to let you take a stab at that.
So I think I'd start from the point of view that I am looking at it from the concept that subjective well-being is the overall outcome and working back on the other ones. I think in terms of policy making, though, I don't see a contradiction at all. Actually, they really help you frame the question. So when you've got objective and subjective measures together, they help you understand what's going on. So the obvious one is on crime, where you see if you have a crime in a low crime rate, the effect on subjective well-being is bigger. People feel more worried about it, whereas there's loads of crimes going on, the effect on subjective well-being is a lot less. And so that's really interesting. So are you dealing with, actually there's lots of crime and we need to deal with that, or are we dealing with the fear of crime, and that's a different policy response, or is it both? So I think they help us understand the problem more clearly, and therefore a much more effective policy solution as a result, and framing the problem accurately. So that bigger stage. I don't see we do have people, there is probably a debate between the framework approach and the sort of life satisfaction approach as one of them. And there's lots of debates in the field about whether you use experiential measures or evaluative measures or whatever. I think they're all useful at this stage, and they're useful for different things. The GDP one, again, I think there are contradictions in the field around it, so I think you're right to point that out. I'm of the view that at the moment GDP, yes, it could be better in various ways, but it is one of the things that helps feed into overall subjective well-being. And the other one actually is life expectancy. So people always talk about GDP being the measure of progress of nations. The actual other one that's always been quite dominant measure of progress is life expectancy as well. And I think what we're saying is it's both, and then we need to look at them both together, and there's some other things that matter as well if we're actually genuinely going to make a difference to people's lives. I don't know if I've quite answered the question, but that's how I see it.
No, I think I like your idea of everything as an input into well-being as an ultimate objective, in which case we do know that people with higher levels of well-being live longer, are more productive, and all kinds of other things that add to GDP and hardly take away from it. And I think the objectives contradict each other if they're posed, if that's the way the question is posed, but I don't think they do. I think they complement each other. But anyway, we have a raised hand from Fuad Basesa, who asked that question. So I don't know, is it possible to speak? Fuad?
Yes.
Okay, well, you had a raised hand and we're discussing your question, so you must have a response.
Yes, from my following to the today morning sessions, there were some misunderstanding expressed between subjective and objective well-being. There are some interference between the terms used in the well-being science. This is why I raised my question, afraid of being, as economists, went on their direction on contradictory conceptions, and I wanted this science to be going on a homogeneous direction within a very clear meaning and agreed upon between leaders, and you are one of these leaders who should lay down the basis for the takeoff for a science without or to avoid this science the future problems of methodology and of approaching the final contribution of this. Also, if you allow me, I raise another question about how we could fill the gap between research and policymakers. And as example, I tried to write an article in the media on the meaning of economics of happiness, and it was refused to be published in our country, of course. And this raises also a question which happened in the last sessions of today morning about how we compare happiness between countries, various countries, within different systems, within different values. And this is a basic challenge facing this science. Thank you.
This is a really interesting set of questions, actually. So there's about 3 different things there that I will pick up on, if that's all right, Carol. So the first is, I'm not a researcher, so I'm a policy official, and I know that there will be disputes within the academic field, and I want there to be those. What I was finding was that the disputes seemed very big as an outsider, but actually after 50 years or so, there's quite a lot we know and can use in a practical way in policy making. And what we needed to do was say, we know enough, this concrete stuff can happen in a consistent way. So getting agreement to such monetized values was quite a major achievement. So there's some bands we've given in terms of values, but actually that dispute kind of needs to go on still. Just doesn't necessarily need to go on in as public a way as it was doing. So between experience on different types of measures and stuff, because what I found quite early on is that what was common knowledge to this community, to the research community that they've known for years, actually was completely new to most people I talk to. So a lot of what I'm talking about in terms of wellbeing drivers and research, you guys will know really well, but actually the local government official from Norwich or wherever I'm talking to is completely like, wow, I did not know this. So I think there's that line between policy and practice and the debate in the science. The debate in the science kind of needs to happen and continue to go on. But actually we've got enough that we can use with a solid base, which takes me to your next question about this article in the newspaper. So I've likewise found it really hard to get particularly public policy traction on the economics of happiness. And it's basically something I've discovered that everybody's talking about and knows about, but nobody publicly talks about, because it's really hard to talk about in a public political context. There was actually quite a good bit by the OECD looking at the sort of political economy of this stuff. And it's hard. I don't quite know why it's quite so hard, but there was a brilliant PhD, which is where I'll come to at the end, which said the science of happiness and the academics who work on it and the practitioners who use it in the marketplace, etc., are using the same body of knowledge. They just use it and talk about it completely differently. So the public conversation about happiness and quality of life is, and the products and services that are around that is actually built on the same science. It's just almost that the two would never meet as different ends of the magnet on the same stage. So I do think there is a question about how we get the economic aspects of well-being talked about more in a political public policy context. But I think the public debate is fine, and we should stop trying to force it together. The last one you talked about was different countries. I think this is a real challenge. And actually, one of the ones I was really interested in, the Global Wellness, the Wellbeing Institute, is looking at different concepts of different cross-cultural concepts of contentment, calm, broader range of different emotions. And I think that is really exciting. I must stress that the measures that I'm working with are harmonized measures, the 4 smallest you can get into there. I think there is real scope for understanding emotional experiences more broadly, and also understanding the different cultural concepts, cultural conditions that people are in, and actually all these different concepts. I'm fairly agnostic onto how different states are run, how different cultures are run. You can see that within different companies. You can have high well-being in a whole range of different companies, different organizations, different places. They're kind of achieved in different ways. And I think that's fine. So I think there's 2 things on that. One is there's lots of different ways to have a successful state. The second is we do need a broader understanding of different ranges of emotions. But I think the science is there to start doing that.
Yeah, can I add to that, Nancy? Just on both fronts. One, having been both mainly in research, but also in a bit in policy. And from the starting point, we had, in talking about the politicization of it, we had a National Academy of Sciences panel on well-being in 2011, 2012. And the first article that came out about us was in the Wall Street Journal, a known conservative newspaper, saying that this was an Obama government-funded approach to have the government tell you how to be happy. So not a glowing start. And first of all, the National Academy of Sciences is not funded by the president, but rather a self-sustaining scientific entity. But there is, I think, this sort of mismatch between what you hear in the public, and there is a lot of how to be happy, and sort of that's what catches media attention, right? And in the end, I think in the robust measurement science, everything Nancy showed, and the measures that I think we now have a lot of agreement on, make a clear distinction between things like momentary happiness and life satisfaction and eudaimonia, and the more serious measures that include life course evaluations and life purpose. And what really, they seem to matter much more to life course outcomes than just, more momentary happiness. And nothing we do is really how to be happy. It's giving people information about what makes for higher levels of well-being and better lives, and people can make those choices themselves. So there is a disconnect between the scientific debate and the public debate, but that it doesn't just apply to well-being. It applies to a lot of scientific questions. Things as simple, and in the US, again, as whether you wear a mask or not. There's no science in the public debate. It's complete ideology. So I would say it's a challenge, but it's not a challenge unique to well-being. And I do think there's been quite a lot of very gradual, albeit, alignment between the scholarly research and some policy-based understanding of what we can do with it. The UK is a complete leader of this charge with the Green Book that Nancy talked about, and all kinds of other things which are really seriously incorporating well-being into policy design, to policy priorities, to cost-benefit analysis. But New Zealand is following right behind. Canada has started, and even the laggard US is starting to consider taking well-being much more seriously, in part due to the COVID threat and the concerns about the high levels of despair in our country. But I think there's a gradual and positive development there. And, you know, countries are going to lag and lead in terms of how they take it on. But I do foresee over time, and in the first, you know, in the near future, that many countries will be including the measures as part of their statistics, like the UK, and that will become part of the same way we compare GNP across countries. We will be comparing something like GNP plus, which will include well-being measures. Maybe I'm too optimistic, but you know, I started at the days when nobody took us seriously, and the progress has been phenomenal. I mean, I really can't believe we've gotten to where we've gotten. And then I just also that very difficult question about comparing across countries, and the whole cultural differences. I agree with Nancy that we need a broader base of measures that are better at capturing. For example, we know that women tend to have higher life satisfaction than men, except in countries where gender rights are really compromised. But women also have more stress and worry than men. So how do you square that circle? I think a better range of measures would help us do that. And the same way you may see that in different cultures, right? That just reflects cultural differences in lives and in the way people want their lives to be. I don't think we have a robust measure of culture. That seems almost an oxymoron. I don't see how we could, but I do think we need to make progress forward in getting better at dealing with cultural differences and how they might affect the standard results when we compare across countries. I mean, as econometricians, we do a very blunt thing of just controlling away for those cultural differences in our equations, right? So we can basically say, if you don't take culture into account, or we just, you know, we control for cultural differences, then countries rank this way. I'm not sure putting culture back in would make a huge difference to the rankings, but they would be more meaningful rankings if we were able to really better account for cultural differences rather than just control away for them. But again, that's one of the next challenges, and it is a great question. Let me look really quickly at this chat again and the Q&A.
Some questions in the Q&A, Carol.
Oh, sorry. Can you read it, Martijn?
Yeah, you also have the Q&A button at the.
Oh, yeah. I was just looking in the chat. The problem is I have questions in both.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to. Okay, I'm in Q&A. All right, I'm starting now. I've gone to Q&A. Okay, Kelsey O'Connor. Kelsey, do you want to just ask your question?
Sure. Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Great talk, lots to digest. And so I'm trying to find ways to do that for myself. And partially related to Carol's last sentiment of optimism, I wanted to know how you feel, in particular about the UK, whether or not life is getting better there. In recent years, in the last few decades, I know Brexit's part of that, but it's only the last couple of years. And perhaps the growth in the quality of life field will ultimately address some of these issues, nationalism, loneliness, these items that we're trying to address. And you also indicated that there's a delay. Maybe, you know, it takes 17 years for research to reach the public. So what's your, you know, feeling for what's happening in the UK and how the quality of life research might fit in?
Really good question. And it was one of those ones that's really odd. It actually linked to some of the question that was just asked earlier. So like, it's one of those ones where you go, well, life's getting better. Look, you can see it's all great. And everyone only got really interested in it when the measures all went down. So that was quite interesting. It's like, as soon as the measures went down, everyone was suddenly super interested. When they were going up, everyone was like, no, can't be getting better at all. And I think for many people, it was getting better, actually. So, and that life satisfaction gap for men in particular had closed over the last 10 years, and particularly because of employment, I think. And actually what's interesting is, of course, that not everyone will notice that, to be honest. So if you are like me, working woman in London, probably didn't feel hugely different. But if I was somebody who had a new job in those areas, I probably would be feeling better about my life. So where it's targeted at will feel different. I think there was always, when things were getting better, as it were, there was always this sort of feeling, but how can it be? Like there's these awful things still happening, like school exclusions, etc. Awful experience for this particular group or that group. And I think one of the difficulties has been that people like using the information when it supports what they care about anyway. And that's helpful in some ways, but because well-being covers so many different bits of people's lives, but harder in others. I think a big bit of what we've been doing is making it last, making it relevant. I think we have, and part of the reason for this, so many slides, is because I'm trying to say this is a weighty thing. There is lots here. It is credible. It is robust. You can use it. There's more to it than candles. And that's sort of the feedback I get is, oh, I thought this was about having a spa, and actually it's not. There's a lot more to it, and it's quite practical, and I can see that I can improve what I'm doing here. So I am hopeful, because I think we have tipped it over the edge. I still need to keep talking to the early adopters and growing the number of people who get that this is important. People don't laugh at it anymore than they used to. It used to be joked about, or you waste all this money on this happiness index. It's still quite associated with individual politicians, and until it's sort of becomes the wiring, that's part of the reason for the COVID wired, it's the wiring of the system. It's just done that way, it's just normal.
Okay, thank you.
Just 1 minute, please.
Hello?
Just 1 minute, please. Nancy, I've got one more question. Let me call you back, please. So it's from Peggy Shins, and it says, do you also look at the role of local institutions in providing a care for citizens and citizens' well-being? Our institute tries to look at the role of the local social domain in providing care, youth care, employment support, and other social support for its citizens, and to what extent they are effective and efficient in terms of heightening their well-being. So not what their citizens can do, but what local institutions can do. And I think this is going to have to be the last question, because we're then going to move into the closing ceremony. And we've just got a few minutes.
Yeah.
So over to you on this one.
Hi, Peggy. This is a great question. So yes, we do. So I have focused quite a lot on what individuals can do, but actually our main audience for the partners over the last 4 or 5 years in particular have been local public health teams embedded in local government, but also the voluntary and community civil society sector as well. So that very local group of people. And I'm particularly, and the reason, the distinction I was making in terms of the different levels of wellbeing, the individual and the national and the middle bit, is I think we've got quite a strong public conversation around happiness, so what individuals can do, and quite a good internet, like World Bank and people all looking at these issues. What we know less about is what organizations can do of all these types, including the ones that you talk about. So what can organizations do to improve wellbeing that go beyond courses? So the one I got quite frustrated about, people go, oh, I'll just do a wellbeing training, like learn this stuff. That's fine, but actually what can we do through the organizations and understanding the value that they create? And so that's a large amount of what we've been doing. What difference does it make? Are these, how can this play out in a local community context? So we do have quite a lot on that. And my colleague Joanna, who may or may not be on the call, works in that in the local authority area and with the voluntary community sector as well. So really keen, yes, we're looking at what organizations can do.
All right, thank you so much for that great answer and such an amazing presentation full of so much. I just downloaded the slides. They're in the chat if people want to link to Nancy's wonderful slides. We really appreciate your spending the time with us and all the great work that you and the center are doing, and also helping the UK lead the charge in this area. We have a lot to learn from you. And thanks to everybody for participating. We're now gonna, if people would like to stay on for the closing ceremony, we're gonna have a transition right in this same Zoom meeting to the closing ceremony. So please, as many as you can, stay on. It won't be long. very ceremonial or short, I think. But again, thank you, Nancy, and thank you everybody for attending, and to the last ceremony.
Yeah, I'm trying to start up my.
It's great to see you with Jill Johnson as a name tag, Martijn.
Yeah, but it's interesting.
It's a real head snapper.
Yeah, the interesting thing is this is also not my screen, so I push share screen, but I think this is Jill's presentation.
Sorry, Martijn, I stopped my share, so you should be able to share yours.
Your presentation looks much nicer than mine. So.
I don't have one.
Much more colorful. I have just an. Okay, so we have a short closing ceremony. I would like to thank everyone for attending virtual ISQOLS 2021. As I said, we will look back at ISQOLS 2021, and then Carol and Jill will talk about the development in the ISQOLS community. We have the announcements of the winners of ISQOLS Awards 2021. We will not have the full ceremony today. That will take place on September 4. But we will announce the winners of the ISQOLS Awards. I have to say that the poster award winner for this conference is not known yet, so the jury is still voting. They needed a little bit more time, but the poster award winner will also be announced next week. And then we end the closing ceremony with the obituaries of Ronald Anderson and Edward Diener, and we look forward to ISQOLS 2022 in Burlington, Vermont, and Kelly Hamshaw will tell you everything about that. Well, we had a nice conference. It was the second year that we had a virtual conference. Some quick facts for the dinner table, so you can tell your husband and wife what you have been doing and how many people were present. There were 309 registrations. We had 5 keynote lectures, over 300 presentations, 28 posters, even a movie screening, I think for the first time this year. 93 sessions, 90 sessions have been completed. 3 sessions are still taking place at 7 p.m. Central European time, so please hang on. Also after the closing ceremony, we still have some very interesting presentations to come up. And participants were from 61 different countries and 12 different time zones. If we look at the origin of the submissions, most submissions were from the United States, followed by the Philippines, Germany, Spain, UK, Mexico, the Netherlands, and Italy. Of course, a conference takes a lot of people to organize, and a special thanks goes to many people. There's not enough space and time to mention everyone, but I really would like to mention our President and Executive Director, Jill Johnson, and Carol Graham for the great support they delivered in making this conference happen. Also, the scientific committee and conference organizers, also without you, we couldn't have reviewed all the papers that came in. So Talida, Georgia, Kelly, Jane, Helen, Kelsey, Nicholas, Graciela, and Ming Chang, many thanks for all the help that you provided. We also had a social committee. Normally we have things like a drink or an excursion, but this year we still try to arrange some social gatherings through the Gather program. I would like to extend my gratitude to Lillian Jansbeke and Liliane Lins-Kustner for organizing that. And also, but that will be announced later, our ISQOLS Awards Committee, who put a lot of effort with Daniel Scheck and Kai Ludwigs into organizing the ISQOLS Awards this year. Also, special thanks goes to our keynotes, Dan Ariely, Nancy Hay, Laura Homerick, Nick Potterfy, and Julie Rusk, If you have missed one of them, the videos will be available through our RD Mobile website. And also special thanks to the workshop organizers. So our pre-conference workshop, Joe Sergi, who taught a crash course in psychology of well-being, and Cornelia Walter, who gave her POSI workshop yesterday. Then also, like, this virtual organization required a lot of chairs. So all the Zoom chairs and people who made also like the virtual sessions happen. Many thanks. Also, many thanks to the special session organizers for suggesting sessions for this ISQOLS edition. I think that we had some great special session topics, and many thanks also for helping organizing that. And of course, if you're not mentioned yet, also thanks to all the participants for being there, listening, discussing, and I really hope that we can meet next year in person in Burlington, Vermont. So please come there, and I'll hand over the platform to Carol for some additional thoughts.
Okay, well, I don't think I need to say too much. I think Martijn really covered the ground, except the one very big thanks that is missing, or was missing in his remark, was to thank him, because he was indeed the main conference organizer. And with Jill as, I would say, a full partner. And Jill's also organizing all of us all the time, and has really kept ISQOLS alive not just alive at a difficult time, but growing. And that's really a big credit to her, and just constantly upgrading the website and newsletters and reaching out and thinking about new ways and new partnerships. So her energy and dedication is just remarkable. And Martijn, how you could do this with almost 300 presentations, over 300 people, 61 countries and 12 time zones, and really make it, I think, a really interactive experience and a sense of a group feeling in a real society, even though we're all over the world at different times and places. I'm sure both you and Jill feel the same. Jill said yesterday she felt like she had jet lag, even though she was still in her house, because, some of the sessions, it's been early morning Asia time and midnight Arizona time, or vice versa. So Jill and Martijn, thank you so much. The annual conference is such an important part of ISQOLS. It brings us all together, and it takes a lot of very good research, but it puts it into a worldwide conversation. And I think that's remarkable, and what makes us as a society different and special. Thanks, like Martijn said, to all the session organizers, the participants, of course, the keynotes, which were fabulous. And really thanks to everybody for participating and taking the time and being active. It's, I learn from my time at ISQOLS all the time. And I'm very grateful and lucky to help be a part of it this year and next year, and look forward to seeing everybody in person in Burlington next year. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jill for, I think, a more substantive presentation and a lot of information about where we've been and where we're going. And then also to Kelly to hear about Vermont. And I'm lucky enough to be going up there for 3 days on Monday to get a break from the DC heat. And I'll think about next year's conference while I'm there, although not too much. But anyway, thanks again to everybody for all the great inputs and energy and support, and all the different people on the board and on the conference organizational team, and just people that participated throughout the conference. So be well, good quality of life this coming year, we hope better than last. And over to our wonderful Jill Johnson.
Thank you, Carol. I don't want to go too much into detail. I know everyone's sort of dealing with some fatigue here with all of the sessions, but I do want to echo the sentiments of everyone, saying thank you to everyone who participated. This is just some screenshots of some of the sessions this past couple days. Incredible presentations. I've had the pleasure of uploading all the presentations as they come through and watching a few of the highlights. And I'm just blown away by the talent and the depth of research that was presented just in the past couple of days. So thank you again for all of your contributions. And I hope you enjoyed some of the fun elements going into our gather place. If you didn't, that's still going to be open and you have access to that, excuse me, for the next several weeks. So you're welcome to explore. We have our virtual poster session in there. You can use this space at any time. And I hope that you do take advantage of that. Again, thank you to the conference committee. We won't repeat all of that. I do want to say an extra special thank you to our Zoom session chairs. This really could not have been possible without the people on the back end starting each Zoom meeting. And I sent panic emails a couple of weeks ago just asking for help, and all of these wonderful people stepped up and graciously went through all the steps to make themselves the user in our account and to start those meetings. So thank you so much for that time. Really, really, really appreciate you. I just want to remind you of some ways to stay connected with ISQOLS after the conference. Please continue to stay involved. And one of the ways you can do that is particularly to subscribe to our members forum. If you are not a member, please consider it. And you have a variety of different benefits that come with that, in particular this members forum, where you're able to select any of these topics that are of interest to you. And then we will begin posting relevant content, information throughout the year, every day. You can subscribe to that and receive those emails weekly, daily, whatever your preference is. So please do subscribe to the forum and start contributing, because we rely upon you to provide us with that content as well. I do want to remind you that you have access to the conference platform actually for the entire year. You can always come back to this link, and you can always select on any of these past sessions and watch all of the videos. I will be continuing to upload the videos from this past day, and you always have access to that. You can download the videos as well. You can download the transcripts in the chat bar. So please do take advantage of that. If you ever have any troubles with access, please let me know. Excuse me. I would like to invite everyone to celebrate our 2021 excuse me, award recipients, September 4th. You can see your time zone there. Please do register for that. It is available on our isqols.org events tab. And just very quickly to announce the winners, we'll be giving a very thorough presentation of their accomplishments on September 4th, but I do want to acknowledge them now. For our dissertation awards, we had an incredible amount of submissions this year, and I want to thank our dissertation committee for taking the time to read, I think it was 14 or 15 dissertations, which is a heavy task. The winner this year was Lucia Machia. We had 2 second place awards, Anche Janks and Lucia Moran. We have 2 honorable mention awards, Suzanne Elsas and Jessica Davalos Aceves. So we'll be presenting them with the award for their dissertations on September 4th. Also want to recognize the recipients this year for the ISQOLS annual awards. Young Scholar Award, we had 2 recipients this year, Kelsey O'Connor and Julie Zhu. Our Research Fellow Award in Quality of Life, Wellbeing, and Happiness Research this year is Milena Nikolova. The Distinguished Quality of Life Researcher Award, we had 2 recipients, Rhonda Phillips, Ron Anderson posthumously. The Distinguished Service Award is going to Ming Cheng Sai and Jill Johnson. Award for the betterment of the human condition this year is going to the Foundation for the Study of Happiness for the World Database of Happiness. The Best Annual Applied Research and Quality of Life RQual Paper Award is going to Sergi, authors Sergi, Lee, and Yu. And we have a Festschrift in honor of Ruth Benhoven, given by Alex Mikolos this year as well. So again, please RSVP for that, submit your registration, and you'll be sent the link for the virtual awards ceremony. If Joe Sergi is with us, you can find Joe. I'd like to invite him to say some words about Ron Anderson.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. Okay, let me say a couple of things. Am I supposed to be clicking on join as panelist? I got a.
Yes, go ahead. Joe, having trouble hearing you, so I'll make you an attendee since that was working. Sorry about that. We'll try
Yeah, I
it
wonder
again.
what he must have clicked and gotten lost.
There he is. Okay, sorry, Joe.
Great.
Problem. Actually, the eulogy, the obituary is up on this. So maybe I'll just read it to you. Anyway, Professor Emeritus at the University of Minnesota, Twin Cities. He lived in St. Paul and Wayzata during the past 30 years. Juan was born in Sikeston, Missouri in 1941. He spent 9 years in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia during his childhood, where his father started a hospital and served as personal physician to the court of Emperor Haile Selassie. He attended colleges in Washington and California and graduated with a doctorate in sociology from Stanford University. Ron taught and researched social sciences at the University of Minnesota from 1968 to 2005. And for most of his professional career, Dr. Anderson was involved in 3 distinct disciplines: sociology, educational research, and computer science. His contribution in each area included teaching, research, and writing. As an expert on technology and society, Ron championed efforts to bring technology and social science to bear on public debates. Many of his publications, 125 articles, 4 books authored and 5 edited books, describe and critique the use of computers and new media in research, teaching, and learning. Upon Ron's retirement, he established a nonprofit foundation for the relief of suffering, incorporated and concentrated his efforts in the broad subject area of worldwide suffering. This is how I remember him the most in the sort of the suffering. Well, he, most of the people in ISQOLS and in the well-being community focus so much on well-being. Ron made us look at the other side of the coin, and that's ill-being, i.e. suffering. So with Ron's blessing, efforts are underway to create an online portal via the society pages hosted by in the Department of Sociology at the University of Minnesota to serve as a permanent archive of his research on social suffering and collective well-being, as well as an outlet of new work that is active, ongoing recognition of his legacy. Ron loved to travel and visited over 80 countries for his professional endeavors and for pleasure, often with his wife, Nancy. He wrote memorable summaries of many of those trips, which he shared with his family. As an accomplished photographer, he also not only documented trips, but captured many fantastic images of the life around him. He curated photographs taken by his grandfather while serving as a missionary in China during the early 20th century during the Chinese revolt of the Qing dynasty. These photographs were featured in museum exhibits in China in English and Chinese language picture books chronicling the historic time. They are now part of a permanent collection in the Hoover Institution at Stanford. As a longtime resident of Wayzata, Minnesota, Ron worked tirelessly to protect the historic Bushway Road during the planning and completion of a project to widen and repave the road. Ron also served on the board of directors for the Restless Legs Syndrome Foundation. Ron is survived by his wife of 30 years, Nancy Kehemeyer of St. Paul, and his son, Evan. He's also survived by his sister, Rosalie Lynn, and brothers, Marilyn and James. He was preceded in death by his parents, Marilyn Gustav Anderson, and Frances Eleanor Anderson, and his daughter, Gina Anderson. Let me turn to Ed Diener in memorial. There you go. Okay. I have a sort of a different eulogy, I guess, for Ed. So I'm going to just read the one I have. We feel sadness and grief about the passing of our dear friend, colleague, and mentor, Ed Diener. However, we also celebrate his life and in his many outstanding contributions he has made to ISQOLS and the quality of life well-being research movement. Ed Diener is the foremost quality of life well-being researcher in the world, period. Beginning with his 1984 Psychological Bulletin article, he gave birth to the field of study of subjective well-being. Today, we use several interchangeable terms to refer to the field of study Diener founded: subjective well-being, happiness, positive emotion, life satisfaction, perceived quality of life, and flourishing. He was former ISQOLS president in 1996, 1998, and I remember, helping us, build the foundation for ISQOLS. And he received the highest ISQOLS award for his lifetime scholarly work, namely the Distinguished Quality of Life Researcher Award. He was a co-founder of the Journal of Happiness Studies, an academic journal affiliated with ISQOLS. Besides ISQOLS Life Achievements Award, Dr. Diener has received many prestigious scholarly awards, such as the Distinguished Scientific Contribution Award from the American Psychological Association and the William James Fellow Award for outstanding contributions to scientific psychology from the Association of Psychological Science. His work garnered above 100,000 citations. Frankly, it's much more than that. Dr. Diener has published more than 300 academic articles and chapters on the psychology of well-being. His work has appeared in most prestigious academic journals such as Psychological Science, American Psychologist, Psychological Inquiry, the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology, Psychological Bulletin, among many others. He has co-authored and co-edited many books, including Wellbeing, the Foundation of Hedonic Psychology, Advances in Quality of Life Theory and Research, Culture and Subjective Wellbeing, Wellbeing for Public Policies, among many others. Besides being past president of ISQOLS, Dr. Diener was also past president of the International Positive Psychology Association and Society for Personality and Social Psychology. He was editor of several academic journals, including the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology. He was alumni distinguished professor of psychology emeritus at the University of Illinois, the United States. He has also served as professor of psychology at the University of Utah and University of Virginia, also in the United States. Dr. Diener has received several teaching awards too. Moreover, he was senior scientist at Gallup and an avid spokesman and advocate for the use of well-being metrics in public policy. He has been and will remain a role model and a great mentor for well-being researchers worldwide, and what it means to be a compassionate and an inspirational human. We will miss his physical presence, but we will always remember and cherish his legacy. Okay, on that note, I'll turn it over to Jill. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. At this time, I would like to invite our organizers for the 2022 conference in Burlington, Vermont, USA, Kelly and Jane, and hopefully you can show your video and unmute.
Jill, it says I can't show my video because the host has disabled it, or my incoming video at least. I do have our other video up online, and if Jane's still on the line, I'll let her say a few quick words before we.
I am. I'm here, and I can't start any video either. So including my own. So you can only see my name up there in lights.
You
So
are now my co-host, so I think you should be able to share your screen now.
There. Okay. Well, now you
there.
can see us.
Now you can see us.
Thank you, Martine.
Well, Kelly and I are, while Kelly's gearing up the video, we just want to say we are so pleased and honored to be hosting the conference next year in lovely Burlington, Vermont. You're such an esteemed group of scholars and presenters. I'm so impressed, and I look forward to seeing many of the presentations that I missed. And Jill, thank you so much. I'm so glad that they will be available for us. So Kelly, do you think it's ready to go?
I do think it's gonna go.
Great.
Fingers crossed.
Welcome to the beautiful University of Vermont campus in Burlington, Vermont. I'm Jane Kolodinsky.
And I'm Kelly Hamshaw.
And we're here to give you a great preview for the 2022 International Quality of Life Studies Conference.
We can't wait to welcome you to Vermont and show you all that we have to offer in this campus and our community and beyond.
We do live in a beautiful place.
We've put together a few slides to share a bit more about our conference venue at the University of Vermont and the City of Burlington to generate some excitement for bringing the ISQOLS community back together in person next year. Our historic campus is located at the top of the hill overlooking the City of Burlington, and it looks across the beautiful Lake Champlain to the Adirondack Mountains in New York State. Burlington is Vermont's largest city, home to about 42,000 residents. The city has been widely recognized for its environmental sustainability initiatives, outdoor recreation opportunities, and a thriving food scene in its vibrant downtown core, making it an ideal place to host a conference focused on quality of life. We do have a regional airport with daily connections from major hubs like New York City, Washington, D.C., and Atlanta. We're also within driving distance from cities like Boston and Montreal. Our primary conference venue is the Dudley Davis Center, which serves as our student center during the academic year. Built in 2007, it was the first student center in the United States to earn the U.S. Green Building Council's Leadership in Energy and Environmental Design Gold Level certification, and features beautiful spaces and many amenities that will make ISQOLS 2022 an enjoyable gathering for all of us. There are a range of nearby lodging accommodations within walking distance or by free shuttle service, including some reasonable on-campus housing accommodations. Burlington is well known as a vibrant place for culture, arts, and community events. Our Church Street Marketplace hosts many outdoor summer events along its pedestrian-only marketplace that features amazing restaurants, local artists, and unique shops. Beyond Church Street, Burlington's different neighborhoods have their own unique identities. Here you can see an image from an annual event held in the city's South End neighborhood, which is a city-designated arts and culture district with lots of wonderful artists and maker spaces. Vermont is known for its commitment to conservation and the environment. There are plenty of hiking trails or scenic viewing areas for enjoying the beautiful Green Mountains within a short distance of Burlington. And for those interested in more aquatic adventures, you can walk along the city's waterfront area, bike along the shoreline, rent a kayak or a paddleboard, or visit one of the city's public beaches to enjoy Lake Champlain. Vermont has a strong reputation in the area of sustainable agriculture and food systems. Within walking distance of campus in Burlington's downtown is the Intervale Center, a 360-acre urban farm that provides a place for community-supported agricultural ventures that provide the greater Burlington community with fresh, healthy, locally grown foods. Shelburne Farms, a short drive away, is another community asset that promotes local foods, land stewardship, and education for sustainable development. August is a wonderful time of year to visit Vermont to experience all the amazing locally grown food and appreciate Vermont's working landscape. We promise that you'll have plenty of opportunities to sample some of our favorite Vermont foods during our time together. On behalf of the organizing team at the University of Vermont, I can share that we are very much looking forward to welcoming you to Vermont next year as we gather together once again to share important contributions to understanding quality of life and well-being. Please stay tuned to the ISQOLS website for more details coming soon. Thank you and be well.
So that's our pitch for joining us in Vermont next year. Of course, it's really difficult to tell exactly what the conditions will be, but Jane and I were both happy to report that we have the highest vaccination rate in the United States at this time. And we're really looking forward to bringing ISQOLS to Vermont finally next year.
Yes, and as you can see from Kelly and my screen, the sun is out. It's a lovely day, and we hope the same will be the case next August. So thank you, everyone, and we really do hope that you register for next year's conference and join us in Vermont.
Oh, I should mention, Jill, we were talking about sending out an interest survey so we can get a good sense of how many folks think it will be possible for them to join us so we can start really honing our space needs for next year. So stay tuned for that as well.
Thank you so much, Kelly and Jane. That was a great presentation. I'm so looking forward to next year. And as great as this virtual conference was, it just does not have the same feeling as an in-person conference, as we all know. So I think we're all longing for that. And hopefully we will be able to convene in person at the lovely Vermont next year. So thank you again so much.
Thank you.
So this time, if Carol and Martijn are with us. I'm not sure if Martijn is with us still.
I'm still with you.
Okay, great. Just wanting to remind everyone that even though this is the closing ceremony, we still have 2 sessions going on. So if you can still join us, please do for those last 2 sessions. If you're not able to, otherwise, thank you again so much, everyone, for this wonderful conference.
Thank you, Jill.
Yeah, thank you, Jill.
Thank you all. We'll see you soon, hopefully.
Yeah.
Goodbye.
And I hope both Martijn and Jill get some sleep now.
Yes. After the next session, one last session.
That's mine. It's going to be boring. Don't worry about it.
No, it won't. All right.
No.
Bye, everyone.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.